Welcome to Tips for the Transition, where we have deep, meaningful conversations about life. We talk about how significant changes like divorce, grief, and career change can affect us, our family, our relationships, and our work, and how to move beyond them. I'm your host, Maria Tomás-Keegan, certified career and life coach for women, and I'm here to support you through the messy seasons of life so you can answer big questions like who am I now and how do I move on from here? If you're ready to consider new options, be inspired, and meet incredible women who are on this life journey with us, you're in the right place. You'll find something in each episode to give you hope and encourage you to move from panic to powerful, from rocky to resilient, and from upside down to right side up. This is Tips for the Transition. Hello. Welcome back. If you are a returning guest or visitor, welcome to the podcast. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, your host, and I want you to know that there are two things that I am very passionate about when it comes to serving professional women. The first one is helping you to create a life and career that fulfills you, and the second one is introducing you to inspiring guests. These fantastic women are role models for the rest of us, and they are resources to help you explore different career transition approaches, practices, and tips. So if something strikes a chord as you're listening today and you want more information, please check out the show notes for ways to connect, follow us, or subscribe. And I'd love it if you'd share a comment or a review if something resonated with you. So, as I often do, I start my podcast with questions for you. Here's one. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns in your life or career seem to repeat themselves? Ever wondered that? We often see this happening in relationships where we seem to be attracted to the same kind of people over and over, and we're not happy in those relationships. Well, it can happen in your career too. So you might accept a job offer from companies that tolerate bad behavior, for instance, and you get stuck in the middle of it again and again. I often see this repeating pattern with my clients, and my next guest is going to help us understand why it might happen. Stacy Backauskas. I'm not going to say that word, her last name again, so we call her Staci B, is an educator, author, and specialist helping people recognize how early trauma might influence their career choices. Stacy spent more than 20 years in corporate and has published 8 books. She's super smart. She is a highly sensitive, creative woman with a touch of trauma in her own life. And she is now a caregiver. She has been, listen to this eclectic background, stand-up comedian, actress, poet, visual artist, and I'm told she's a fabulous cook. I love what she says. Stacy says she's here to share practical ways to live your destiny, not your fate. I love that. So today we're going to address the question, has early trauma influenced your career choices? Welcome, Stacy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here and to share what I've discovered on my own journey with people who might benefit from it, because that's the point.
That's right. That's the point. It's sharing our experience and our resources so that we can help others. That's the whole point. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, you say you've been touched by early trauma. I'd love for you to pull back the curtain just a little bit for us and give us some background to set that stage.
Well, I think that everybody, I don't know that virtually any child gets out of childhood without some form of trauma, you know?
Yeah.
Being a mother is the hardest job in the world. And nothing was ever, intentional as much as it was just the nature of being a parent with more than one child. And I think that depending on how you're wired when you come into this world, and I think I've probably been sensitive from in utero until today, um, because I define trauma, early trauma, as anything that disconnects you from who you really are. And that's not just me. Stephen Porges, who is a medical doctor expert in this field, has been saying that for years. So when you as a child have needs to feel safe, as we all do, and they're not getting met from being who you are, then your survival mechanisms kick in and you start to wear masks and become somebody different in order to get that safety that
Mhm.
feels so incredibly necessary to us. And so that's where it stems from, and I don't particularly talk about my specific brand of trauma. uh I there are other people involved, and I would never want to involve anybody else but me. This is just my story, and this is how I deal with things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it has been a process for, first of all, for me to realize that I wasn't behaving and navigating my life as who I really am, and then starting that journey to unravel all of the beliefs and behavior that were created from that disconnection that infiltrated my life.
Okay. All right. Let's dig into this a little bit more. The the question is, what is early trauma? So you said it is something that happens that disconnects you from who you really are. Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure, we were just dealing with this before we went live, in that the microphone I was using was causing some challenges in being heard. And I said, well, if this isn't a God is a funny guy moment, I don't know what is, because for the majority of my childhood, I was criticized for being too loud. And
Mm.
the fact that I wasn't able to be heard by you is just hilarious to me.
Yeah.
That is one of the things, because I was raised in the 60s. I mean, we were barely out of children should be seen and not heard
Yeah.
in the
That's how
60s.
I was raised. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just all in the 19th century. I mean, that's how it was. And so, from a societal moray perspective, me being a loud child, which is just how I expressed myself, it's how I expressed my joy and my feelings and everything else, was constantly being tamped down.
Okay. So when we think about, early trauma, it does not have to be an abusive kind
No,
of thing, right?
no,
It
it's a spectrum.
right,
It's a
right,
spectrum from something like this, which to some people may seem minimal. I mean, I've said not everybody has to be chained to a radiator to have experienced trauma in their
right,
childhood.
right.
Again, being a mother specifically and parents in general is an extraordinarily difficult job. There are things you don't understand as a child in terms of what it takes to pay the mortgage or the rent and put food on the table and clothes on your back and make sure you have the money to go on your field trip to the zoo. I mean, those are all responsibilities and worries for parents that take up their bandwidth.
Right.
We all get a certain amount of bandwidth when we wake up in the morning, and when it's gone, it's gone.
Yep. Yeah. So we might hear as a child, we might hear something from a parent or a teacher that was not intended to hurt,
Right.
but it caused us to form a belief
Absolutely.
about ourselves,
Right.
right? And that's the piece that we carry with us, and it can then influence how we behave as we mature, right?
Yeah, I'll give you another example. I have a friend of mine who comes from a very large Italian family. She's the youngest. she could never get a word in edgewise. So the perception and the belief that was created growing up as a child, all with older siblings,
Yep.
who were older, louder, more experienced, knew how to navigate the family hierarchy and politics in a way that she didn't, even though it wasn't something they were conscious of, leaves her with the nothing I ever say is good enough. I'm not worthy of being heard.
Right.
And right. So
Great example. Great
yeah.
example.
So hers is the exact opposite of mine.
So I resonate so well with that story because I'm the youngest of four and the only girl. So,
Right. So
my experience is, like you said it earlier, and my experience is little girls are seen and not heard.
yep.
And little girls don't do what boys do.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
Influenced
let's
a
think
lot.
about how that rolled into your career.
Yeah.
Because what I've discovered in this, and this happened as an accident, to be honest with you, because I was looking at my resume one day for something. I don't even remember what it was. And I'm like, holy crap, every one of these jobs is a trauma response. Oh my God.
All right. I want to dig into that. So what happens? Let's start here. What happens when early trauma is not addressed? And we'll get
Well,
to how you connected the
sure,
dots.
sure. When early trauma is not addressed, you find yourself in situations repeatedly where you don't feel safe. Only you're not aware that you don't feel safe because you've already created survival behaviors to feel better. So, and that's why I say the career is the last hidey hole for early trauma. Because most people, if they begin to address early trauma, they do it in their late 20s and beyond. This is not something you're dealing with while you're in college. You're too busy drinking, smoking weed, and doing whatever else so that you don't feel what you're
Right.
feeling.
Right.
Or diving into academics, you're doing some kind of distracting behavior so that you don't deal with it. So I find in my experience when talking to people, it's usually like your late 20s-ish, excuse me, probably into your 30s that you're like, wow, maybe everything's not as kosher as I thought it was. But by then, you're already well anchored in a career. So
Yeah.
the behaviors and the patterns that you brought with you from those early years, and the Jesuits say, they have a saying something along the lines of, give me a boy and a boy when he's 4, and by 7, I'll return to you a man. Because science and research have shown that your whole belief system is pretty much formed by the time you're 7 years old.
Wow.
So if those things happen in your early childhood, they're already in you. And you don't have the cognitive awareness at that age to even understand what's going on. It's just become a part of your identity. So when you begin the unraveling process at whatever age, you typically start with how you treat yourself, your relationship to money, food, sex, drugs, those kinds of things. Then you start talking about your relationships, your friendships, your life partners, the people that you date, and the commonalities among them to identify the patterns. But this is why the career is the last place it hides.
So it's interesting that you put it that way. In my work, I work with women mostly, but I see this pattern a lot. And digging into those limiting beliefs and where they came from is a difficult. It's often not met with. It is met with resistance.
Really? Color me shocked.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean? I don't have any limiting beliefs. Yeah. However, the patterns that repeat are evidence of that. So
Absolutely.
really taking a look at, being really honest with yourself about the kinds of choices you've made in your career and what patterns they might be uncovering, revealing, right? You got to be willing to look at that.
Well, you have to be, because if you're not, then you're just playing. And that's okay. No judgment. Everybody is where they are.
Right.
you know, but this is not a journey for the faint of heart.
No, it's not.
And this is not a journey for people who are unwilling to experience their emotions about things at the deepest level, because here's the thing, like it or not, you're going to get angry.
Yeah.
You're going to get really angry.
Yeah.
And to have a safe place, you know, the word in common coach language these days is a container, you know, in which to express that, whether it's with a therapist or a select group of friends with whom you feel safe. I mean, these are all things that I address when I do workshops or work specifically with people, because there is stuff that's going to come up that is not going to feel good. But that doesn't mean it's going to last forever.
Right. Well, so we just have to choose to look at it, right? So let's just look at it. No, don't pass judgment about it.
Right.
Let's just look at it. Let's peel back the onion a little bit, and then you get deeper and deeper into the onion as you peel it back. So the effect on someone's career, if they don't address these long-standing beliefs that they hold, or values that they hold, or fears, right? Those are all things that could be lurking under the surface, that could be the root causes of career choices that don't serve you, right? That don't feel good, that don't feel right anymore. And why does this keep happening? Questions like that come up. So
you hit on something really, I'm sorry, you hit on something really important, and I don't want to forget to say something about it. It's becoming aware.
Yeah.
Because so many times, and if COVID has taught us nothing, it's that we're all hiding a lot of stuff. Right? Because the lockdown forced us into quarantine or into some type of isolation or quasi-isolation. And you could no longer run 24/7, go to the bar for a drink with a friend every night after work. Those options weren't available anymore. So all of the little pink elephants that had been trampling around your living room now had agency, for lack of a better word, to get your attention.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think more and more people, and this is why I feel like this is like divine timing, quite honestly, for me to be talking about this stuff, because I think there are more and more people in a place now. And, you know, the unemployment rates have shown it. Articles all over the world have shown it, that people are not happy with their jobs.
Yep.
You know, and if you want to make it about your boss or the company policy, okay, fine. And I'm not saying that's not a part of it, but your always and forever best friend is the mirror. And as long as you're making it about something external, you are ruling out the potential for sustainable change in your life. Period.
Right. Yeah. And I think you said people are not happy in their careers. I think it starts that they're not happy.
Right.
And that their career is, and their choices, right? All of their choices, but their career choices are evidence of something underlying, right? And it's probably not just in their career.
Well, here's the thing, though. I'm going to challenge that just a little bit. Just a little bit. Because if someone has been working with therapy or whatever other modalities they're using, some type of somatic release, whatever it happens to be, and they have managed to find themselves in a healthy partnership, and they've got healthy friends, the thing about a career is there is an implied hierarchy of authority where there is not in a relationship, a healthy relationship or a healthy friendship. So you may find yourself really having good times with your partner. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, but maybe you're able to have communication with something is bothering you, or to be able to listen to someone else challenge you about something, or tell you how they felt when you did a certain thing without having to crawl into a ball and suck your thumb. But the career, with that implied hierarchy and authority issue, especially if you come from a background of being raised in organized religion, It's a thing. And so that's why I say I feel like it's the last hidey hole for your childhood stuff, because that implied authority is a huge thing. The fear of what's going to happen if I speak up for myself
Yeah.
to my
Yeah.
boss
Yeah.
or to
Yeah.
my boss's boss.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I just had a consultation, whatever, with someone who teaches, but she's an adjunct. And on the pay scale, they get paid less than the maintenance people at this university. I mean, adjuncts have always been treated like that. But anyway, and oftentimes they will send her an email a couple of weeks before the semester because one of the full-time professors' classes hasn't gotten enough registrants. And so they cancel that class and they give that full-time professor her class. But the fear of it all going away, when the question ought to be, how else can I use my skills, talents, and abilities in a
Right.
different arena, ought to be the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you don't ever have the power to change somebody else's behavior.
Of course.
So you've got to ask yourself, is this the environment that's best for me? And I understand people not wanting to leave a job until they have something else lined up. I get that completely.
Oh, deal with that all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that, and I've done it both ways.
Yeah.
You know, I reached a point at the last part-time job that I had where I'm like, oh my God, this is just triggering me every single time I'm here. This is hurting me. The money I'm making might look like it's helping me, but when I look at it from a meta level, it's not at all.
All right.
And I left.
I want to dig into that because you shared with me a process you went through to connect the dots so you could recognize what drove your career choices. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think the first thing is being willing to understand that your childhood had an impact on you. And if you want to hold your parents accountable, hey, that's fine. I'm not in a place where I'm willing to do that at this point in my life. My parents did the best they could with what they had from where they were. And that's just the truth. I call it PO for pre-Oprah. You know, nobody was talking about this kind of stuff before Oprah really gained some popularity in this country. And so I think the first thing you've got to do is be willing to say, yeah, there are things that I could look at. And if I'm willing to do that, it's going to lead to change. And I trust that at the end of that process, or as that process progresses, that it's going to mean a happy, healthier life for me. That's the first thing you have to be willing to do. And then the second thing you need to be willing to do is educate yourself on what those trauma responses look like. That's how I figured it out when I looked at that's a lie. I didn't figure it out. It was so far in my face that I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. The patterns.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the kinds of people I worked with, the kinds of people I chose as a boss, and the characteristics that they had that were related to how I experienced my childhood and how I felt ashamed or not good from some of those experiences. And I just kept repeating them.
So
You know?
you found yourself in work situations where the people you worked with or for kind of mirrored the same behavior that you experienced when you were growing up. Is that right?
Right. Which is, and I'll give you a really good example because I think a lot of women are going to relate to this one. In the psychology world, they call it overfunctioning. And that is volunteering for stuff that's not in your job description, putting it under the label of going the extra mile.
Yeah.
When really, if you were willing to sit and be quiet with it, what's driving you is your need to prove your worth, not your desire to go the extra mile. Well, why do you want to do that? Who are you trying to prove it to?
Right.
You know, we were talking before that I just got recognition for something. And I said, the irony is that it happened right after I went over the tipping point of realizing I don't need to prove anything to anybody anymore. And that's when the universe meets you. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
It's when you can get to that place, but it takes work. You know, you
Yeah.
wouldn't expect to walk into a gym after not having exercised for 10 years and walk out in 2 weeks looking like Heidi Klum. People would think you were crazy if you told them that was your goal. So you can't
Right.
make a goal that's equivalent in this arena. You know, it's not about getting perfect. It's not about healing. It's about getting better. It's about taking a step that honors you. And even if you're still in the same job and you decide you're not going to volunteer for this project, you're not going to throw your name in the hat for it. That is
Right.
one tiny step to get out
Oh,
of that over-functioning behavior.
yeah. It's called setting boundaries, right? Recognizing, becoming aware, first of all, that there's something repeating here
Right.
and that you want to examine it. You want to explore it.
Mhm.
So you're open to, and I find it so, I was working with a client just last night that I helped open her eyes to very similar behavior here and how she was responding to it and how she could shift her response, which is what you're talking about. Right?
Exactly.
Just decide that if you're volunteering to take on more work, you don't have the bandwidth to do it or really the desire, and you have nothing to prove, right?
Are you coming in early all the time?
Right. If you just come to terms with what it is
Right.
you're trying to do by exhibiting that behavior, and that's not working for you, right? Then you make a choice to change it.
Well, and you know what? Anyone can set boundaries. Maintaining them is a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. It takes practice. It
You know?
takes
Yeah,
repeating to yourself
absolutely.
that, and recognizing sooner that this is behavior it's a function of stuff I learned when I was little, right?
Right. And that takes it out of it. See, because this isn't really something we've got the time to dive into. But one of the things I will say is if anybody who is watching this has gotten an official diagnosis, mental health wise, from the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health, which is what the insurance companies require in order to pay for your therapy, that is an antiquated product of the patriarchy and often makes people feel like there's something wrong with them. When you can look at it as Adolf Meyer, who has his own had his own school of psychology, was at Johns Hopkins, calls them maladaptive reactions. And that's what they are. That
Yeah.
takes the shame and the responsibility for instituting them off of us.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the cognitive awareness to understand that we were even learning, much less what it was we were learning.
Right.
So
But
at the end of the
that it gets ingrained, right,
absolutely.
over time, and we don't even realize how it's affecting us.
Right.
So coming to terms with that, recognizing that that could be the cause, the root cause of the repeating behaviors or choices you make.
I'd almost
Yeah.
guarantee it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So let me ask, is it possible in your experience, is it possible to separate your career from your early trauma? Is it possible to do?
Well, here's the thing. I used to believe in the concept of being healed. And I am not certain that that should be the goal anymore. Actually, I'm very certain it should not be the goal. What
Okay.
should be the goal is what we were talking about earlier, from my perspective anyway, in that you want your life not to be a continual series of survival behaviors.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
But
A-
yeah,
and if you can find a way to unravel this bit by bit, step by step, you will begin to see that more and more.
mm,
Because the other thing to consider, which I think is very, very important, Maria, is that you're dealing I joke about this all the time, although it's not really funny, that if you're dealing with something in your microcosm and it is also in the macrocosm of culture, oh, good luck with that. Because you're talking about things that are so tightly intertwined that it is going to require some commitment and focus and effort on your part to pull that stuff apart.
But I think what's empowering about this conversation, right, is that we have choices.
Mm-hmm.
If we are aware that something could be at the root of these repeating patterns that don't make us happy, and we are open to exploring what that might be, then we have choices to either continue the behavior because I don't know why you would, but you could. That's a choice, right? Continue the behavior because that's what you know.
Absolutely. I was just going
Because
to say, it's because it's familiar.
right, because
That's all.
that's you're in your comfort zone, and everything else you're thinking about is scary. It's outside of your comfort zone, but that's where the growth happens, and that's where the new choices that you could make will help to serve you better.
Absolutely. And to be honest, the precursor to all of that is recognizing behaviors that indicate that you aren't happy.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I mean, people aren't always willing to admit that they're not happy. But if you spend 6 hours a day on the weekends watching stuff on Netflix or your television or whatever, or hanging out at the bar watching football or basketball or whatever, I mean, if you are doing things, that's the first thing you have to look for. Can you be an observer of your own behavior
Yeah.
to determine whether or not you are behaving the way someone who is, I mean, you can't be happy all the time, obviously, but someone who is content with their life, who knows what joy feels like, are you demonstrating behaviors that are indicative that that's your life?
Right.
And if you're not, then are you willing to look at whatever it might be that's causing you to want to check out that way? You know, I think that's important.
That is recognizing that you are checking out, right? That you are self-soothing,
Absolutely.
right? Recognizing that pattern and being willing to explore what might be behind it.
Right. And depending on what your tell is it going to be indicative of whether you're in flight, fright, or freeze?
Right. Yeah.
You know, it like freeze has been my thing. I'm still working on thawing, if I'm honest, you know, because it's only been recently that I've realized I've spent most of my life in freeze because that was my safe place. For other people, it may be physical activity.
Yeah.
They may spend 8 hours at the gym, but that's no healthier than lying on your bed and watching 8 hours of Netflix. At the end of the day, it's really not, because you're hurting your body to do that,
Yeah.
unless it's for a finite period of time where you're training for something.
Yeah. So it's
You know?
overdoing in any way. Right.
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 You know, running away. Are
Yeah.
you constantly going on vacation? Perhaps to your financial detriment. You know?
Yeah.
So those are really good things to look at. You know, and you know, again, to familiarize yourself with what are trauma response behaviors. What is that? Google it. We are so fortunate. You know, I mean, when I first first therapist I ever saw was in 1993. None of this was in the lexicon.
Right.
None of it. Again, pre-Oprah. You know, nobody was talking about this stuff in any way. And so, and I was also kind of held in the prison of traditional Western psychology
Yeah.
and medicine because there was no such thing as somatic release. You know, maybe if you were in another country or you were in a very specific niche of people who dealt in that world, but it wasn't anywhere near the mainstream.
Right. Right.
We are so fortunate right now to be, if you realize this is affecting your life and you want to do something about it, the methods, modalities, and protocols that are out there to support your journey are endless.
Literally at your fingertips.
Absolutely.
Literally at your fingertips. And there are so many people who are now in this helping field. You know, you and I are both part of that. we're here to help. We are here to help you because we are just a little further along in our journey
Exactly. That's all.
than you are. And that is that, that doing it alone is, like you said it earlier, I've said this before too. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's not easy. It's not, the approach might be simple, but it's not necessarily easy. And doing it alone makes it just that much harder.
It does, which is why a support system it's non-negotiable.
Absolutely. I totally
How
agree.
whatever that looks for you, based
Right.
on your financial situation, your desire to do this, because yeah, we may be a little further along the journey, but that's just because we've made this choice.
Right.
It's not because we're better than anybody.
No.
It's just because this is where we've chosen to focus our energy.
Right.
You may have chosen to focus your energy on the physical. And so you may be 10 miles down the road from me in terms of your health and fitness. It doesn't make you better or me better. We're all equal. It's just
And we're just on different paths at
exactly,
different stages
exactly.
of that path. We've got our own roadmap, right? And we're at different stops on our own roadmap. Yeah.
Well,
All
and
right.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you weren't
No, go
finished. I
ahead.
apologize. I said something that has been on my mind that I want to share that I have found to be one of the most powerful exercises you can do is to choose any love song. I am partial to The Broken Road by Rascal Flatts and sing it to yourself in the mirror.
Hmm.
Because I've been on a broken road, but it's led me
Yeah.
straight here.
Yeah. Get a lyric that resonates, that kind of hits you in the heart,
Mhm.
and really absorb that, take it in, and think about why it resonates so strongly. I love that. It starts to it just starts to peel away.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into our last segment,
Okay.
Stacy. Thank you for that. We always end every episode with tips from my guest with practical strategies. So I would love for you to share your first tip.
Sure, and we've already kind of touched on it, but it would be to familiarize yourself with survival behaviors that are born of childhood experiences and or trauma. Things like hypervigilance, rebelling against authority just for the sake of rebelling against authority, not necessarily because there's a legitimate reason.
Okay. Mhm.
People pleasing, avoiding conflict, and recognizing that these behaviors can help you start to unravel those patterns.
Yeah. And recognizing if you're doing those, if you learned those as a young person and you're doing those in your career, ding, 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 ding.
Right, because you did them to feel safe. So
Yes.
there's no shame in it.
No.
This is
Right.
what your
Right.
lizard brain, your amygdala said,
Yeah.
this is what's going to keep me safe.
No
If
beating
I,
yourself up.
no
Don't
beating
do that.
yourself up, you
Don't do.
know,
Yep. Okay.
if I empty the dishwasher before I'm asked, I get approval. If I fold the laundry and it's not on my chore list, then I won't be yelled at. It's really that simple. That's where it starts.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Tip number 2.
Once you've identified a behavior or even several of them, and I would really encourage people to just start with one. Do one at a time. More than that is going to make you feel very overwhelmed. Trust me. So
I
start
think
with
it,
one.
I think it has a tendency to make you feel bad, really
Exactly.
make you
And
feel bad.
and
Yeah.
that is the antithesis of what you and
That's,
I are trying to encourage here.
that's right. Yeah.
So start with one and ask yourself, where have I displayed this in my career? Where have I overfunctioned? Where have I demonstrated a hypervigilance of I'm aware of everything that's going on so that I can assess needs before anybody has to tell me, because that's what makes me feel safe. And if you want to change it, then I would highly consider, again, going back to a support group of some kind being non-negotiable, that you begin to discuss it with a therapist or a coach so that you can have someone to go, this is what's happening. This is what I'm afraid is going to happen if I change it. Here is a safe plan to make a small change. How did that go?
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that support system, whatever, like you said, whatever that looks like for you,
Right.
is really the starting point for any significant change that you want to make.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a third one?
I do. The final one is review your resume. I said that at some point in time in our conversation, that's how this all showed up to me, and be honest, you have to be willing to be radically honest.
Yeah.
And we can all only be as radically honest as we're capable of being in the moment. You may come back to this 6 months from now and see other things, and that's fine. But for this moment, be as radically honest with yourself as you possibly can be about what the issues you had in each position were. Because that will help you spot a pattern that can help you to identify where you're perpetrating those survival behaviors. And again, to change this, it's helpful to work with a therapist, a trauma-informed coach, someone who understands the inner workings and the dynamics of these kinds of behaviors and and help you take it back to the root so that you're really pulling the weed out by the root and
By
not
the root,
just,
right.
yes, that's
Yeah.
what you want to try to do.
Yeah.
And not that means you're not ever going to be triggered again. And I'm not really a fan of that word because it's so cliche and hackneyed at this point. But it's going to reactivate something in your nervous system that makes you feel unsafe.
And here's the other thing that I think will happen as you get better at this, you're going to see signs,
Absolutely.
early warning signs that you missed before. And when you start to see those signs and the bells and whistles go off and you say, whoa, wait a second, this doesn't feel right to me. This feels like it used to be. And now you have a different choice to make.
Right. And you've got to go through,
about.
absolutely. And you've got to go through several of those steps to begin to create any kind of a shadow of a new normal.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful poem by a woman named Portia Nelson, who's no longer with us. And I think I may not quote it directly, but it's called something along the lines of A Life in 5 Short Chapters. And the first chapter is, I walk down a street, there's a hole, I fall in, I didn't see it, it's not my fault. The second chapter is, I walk down a street, I see a hole, I fall in, it's still not my fault. The third chapter is, I walk down a street, I see a hole, I fall in, it is my fault. The fourth chapter is, I walk down a street, I see a hole, I walk around it. And the fifth chapter is, I walk down a different street.
Oh, I love that.
And in a nutshell, that is change.
That right. It's making choices every single time, right? Falling down the hole after the first time was a choice.
And everything's a choice. We're just not conscious of them.
Right. Right.
But
recognizing it.
Right. And to be honest, you may go through chapter 1 repeatedly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before your ego has been managed well enough to be able to admit that you did make a choice to go into that hole.
And there's the power of trauma, right? As we've been talking about it and how it can cause that repeating pattern. Stacy, you and I could talk about this. I say this often with my guests. We could talk about this for hours. And I love that we had this conversation today.
Me too.
I think it's going to be so important for a lot of people to hear, and hopefully, make them more aware of what might be going on for them, what might be underlying some of these repeating patterns that are making them unhappy, and whether it's in your personal life or your career or a combination, which is most likely happening. But I want to thank you. Thank you for raising our awareness about this, where it is, and I love the way that you said it in our careers. It's kind of that last hiding place. And I think there are a lot of people who are dissatisfied, unfulfilled, and they're wondering why, and this might be something to look at. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, it has been my pleasure. And I always say a little prayer before I do this. And it was actually taught to me by Eric Butterworth, who was the founder of the Unity in Manhattan. And he got this from a friend of his who was an opera singer, because he said, "How do you go out on stage and sing? Isn't that terrifying?" And he said, "No, because when I'm standing in the wings waiting to go on, all I say is, 'Remove me, God, so you can be heard.'" And I say that every time before I do a podcast, because it's not about me. Let the truth and the wisdom that I've acquired from the work that I've done move through me and hopefully benefit somebody else on
Yeah.
their journey.
If it's just one person, it
Yep,
will be worth it. Thank you so
absolutely.
much. All right. I know there's going to be some people who are going to want to reach out to you. So what's the one best way for them to do that?
Well, my website, which is stacyb.com, and it's Stacy with an I. I also have some free resources on there. I actually put together a free education resource and information guide on early trauma that lists some books, some social media people, that kind of stuff. It's totally free on my website. So yeah, if you want to connect with me in any way, that's the best way. And on all social media, I am Hey, it's me, Stacy B.
And the links for all of that will be in the show notes, so you can
Okay.
connect with Stacy in any way you would like. So Stacy, once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was a real
It is
privilege.
my
Thank you.
pleasure, truly my pleasure. All right, and for everyone else, thank you so much for watching and listening. I appreciate that you are a part of this community. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you got something out of it, please leave us a comment or a review. And if you're watching or listening where there's a star rating, pick a star. We'd love to hear from you. And as I said at the top of the show, I love creating and sharing resources for professional women who feel stuck in their careers. So if something in this episode resonates with you and you'd like a fresh perspective on it, reach out. Let's chat. And if you would like to continue this conversation, you can do so in my private Facebook group. The link for that is below. It's called the Career Transition Roadmap. So let's meet again here next Wednesday. I believe it's our time to thrive. So let's do that together. Until next time, I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.